Today our presentation will be done using using Zoom. Our guest is from the Writing Center, Tiffany Teagues. Is that how you say your last name?
That's Tiggis, close enough.
Teagues, okay, great. Y'all remember last semester we had Thad uh, come in and talk about writing. And I think he may have talked some about oral presentations, but I've asked the Writing Center to come in, and Tiffany has answered the call to talk more specifically about how to do a good PowerPoint presentation. So I am excited because I haven't seen this before. So I'm going to be sitting back there with y'all to see what Tiffany has to say. Can you pass the host to Tiffany? And Tiffany, you may begin sharing slides at your convenience.
All right, let's get this.
You got the host. Tiffany, you can begin sharing your slides. We are recording this presentation if you don't object.
Oh, yeah, that's no problem. Let me see.
Our students like to watch our lectures over and over. So we like to make sure they have the opportunity. What are y'all laughing about? Okay. I can tell you're laughing even with your mask on.
Oh, so many reshares, I'm sure. Yep. Okay, so let's see. Can y'all see this?
Got some slides coming up. There we go. Okay, before I turn it over to Tiffany, are there any questions from our last period of instruction? I threw a lot of information at you guys, a lot of dates, a lot of requirements. Everybody good? I did a good job then. Okay. So who can tell me what is due today? The team assignments. Well, who's going to be responsible for which assignment as far as the written reports? That's correct. That should be due today. You can either turn it in paper to Young in the back of the room, or you can submit it on eCampus, but it needs to be done today. And then the next thing we have is next Thursday, your faculty advisor choices. So y'all need to be looking far and wide on who you would like to advise you on your project. Okay. And Blaine, I got your email about the vineyard. I haven't contacted them yet. I'll try to do that today or tomorrow. All right. So today we're you know, like I said, we've kind of closed the door on any more instruction about writing, and we're going to focus these next couple of class periods on really emphasizing your oral presentation skills. One of the prerequisites for this class is COM 203, which teaches you all semester about oral presentations. Hopefully most of you have taken that. So the objective this semester is to really practice what you learned in COM 203 and what we're going to learn today and what we're going to talk about on Tuesday. Because at the end of the semester, when you're out there beginning your job for somebody, you're probably going to be called upon to speak either extemporaneously or make some kind of progress report like we're going to practice this semester. So we want to make sure you get plenty of practice at it. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Tiffany, and you have the controls.
All right, awesome. Okay, so if there's any problem with the audio or anything, just let me know in the chat. I'll be keeping an eye on that just in case anything comes up. Actually, let me make sure I can see the chat. That's probably important for later. There we go. Okay, perfect. All right, so as I've been introduced, I am Tiffany Tiggis. I'm a full-time administrator at the University Writing Center, and today I'm going to be talking to y'all about oral presentations. And as your professor was saying, you know, no matter where you go or what you end up doing, more likely than not, you'll end up doing a lot of oral presentations in some capacity or another, maybe to a lot of people, or maybe just to your internal coworkers. But regardless, these sorts of skills are going to be useful for you throughout your career. So just before we get started, I can't see everybody, and it's impossible for me to display everyone on Zoom, but I'm curious if you can tell me in the chat, is anyone here actually looking forward to giving a speech? Does anyone enjoy giving speeches? Not seeing any answers so far, so I'm going to take that as a no. Yep, not particularly. Oh, someone enjoys it. Okay, so there's usually a couple. There's usually like maybe two people in the classes I present this presentation to that actually enjoy presenting, because for most people, for many people, their number one fear is public speaking. And some people even fear public speaking even more than they fear death. And so today I'm here to share what I've learned through presenting for the Writing Center, and through experience about how to survive the process of giving a speech. And just a really brief anecdote. I used to be one of the people who was, well, public speaking is public speaking. It never really gets, completely easy. And it makes me think of, I've given a lot of workshops, a lot of presentations for the Writing Center since I've been here. But when I was first hired, I remember my very, very first presentation for the Writing Center was to give a presentation on just our services and what we do, super low stakes, just talking about things that I know. But I was extremely nervous about this. And they weren't even sending me out by myself. They were actually sending me with Thaddeus Bowerman, who's presented to y'all before. And we were going to be presenting together. I was presenting the overview of the Writing Center, and then he was presenting on writing afterwards. But I was still incredibly nervous, so I went back to my apartment and I practiced and practiced and practiced. We aren't supposed to take our work home, but I did anyways. And then I gave the presentation, and of course it went fine, despite my nervousness. But afterwards, I was talking to Thad, and I told him that I was excited to do more presentations with the Writing Center so that eventually I would feel completely comfortable with presenting. And I'll never forget what he told me. He looked at me and he said, "Oh, you'll never feel comfortable with presenting." I was like, "Okay, thanks." But his point was, he clarified that, you may not ever feel completely 100% comfortable with giving oral presentations, but the more you do them and the more you learn about how to present, you'll learn what to do to prepare and to alleviate those fears, to combat them and expect them, and know what you need to do to set yourself up for success through preparation. So that's what we'll be talking about today, is how to prepare to set yourself up for success, to expect that there will be that level of nervousness, that level of uncomfortableness with presenting that just comes with the territory, but knowing how to prepare to make sure that you succeed regardless. So today with oral presentations, I'll be talking about basically 5 main things to do with presenting. And that is, we'll be talking about invention, or thinking about what to say, organization, how to say what you want to say, incorporation of visual aids. That will be the bulk of the presentation today, talking about how to design your slides, how to set them up so that they convey the information you want to convey, and also how to do things like not, lean on them too heavily while using them as aids for your presentation. We'll be talking about delivery, and then we'll be talking about the importance of practice with presentations. So if there's one thing that I want y'all to remember to get from this presentation today, is that speeches must be prepared and they must be practiced. And we'll talk about how to do that today. All right, so let's get straight into constructing the presentation itself. And this will include my first 3 points, which is our invention, organization, and incorporation of visual aids. So with invention, the first thing that you want to do, oh, and let me say too, if anyone has any questions, if you want to interject anything, go for it. I'm more than happy to pause and answer a question. If you want to speak up or write in the chat, I've got the chat open over here. Go for it. This is not me just talking at y'all if you want to participate. There will also be a portion where I do ask for your participation in judging some slides in a minute. But in the meantime, any questions, anything at all, feel free to just shout it out, put it in the chat, and we'll address them as we go. All right, so invention. The first thing that you want to do is make sure that you determine the expectations of your presentation. So read the assignment sheet carefully, make sure you understand things like who you're presenting to, why you're presenting, and then what sort of information you're going to be expected to convey. So once you know this, once you know the purpose and the audience, thinking up what to say is a lot easier. So for instance, let's say that I know that I'm delivering a college commencement address. So I know who I'm talking to. I'm presenting to college graduates. And then I can start thinking about my central message. I know my purpose is to inspire the graduates to celebrate their achievements. So then I can choose a message that can convey that purpose. So my message might be to always remember to have a responsibility to better the world. That's my central idea or thesis. And then I can develop the rest of my presentation around that central idea. And I can do that maybe by telling a story, by providing facts, using logic. Like if you do this, the consequence will be that. Or I can even use quotes or ideas from people that they would respect to back up my main point, my main idea. And then as I develop this main idea, I can think of how I want to do that, how I want to approach this. I can appeal to my audience's sense of logic, which will probably make most sense with y'all's presentations for this class. So what would make sense to your audience? You can use statistics, you can use research, you can use facts to back up your point. And then if appropriate, I can also appeal to their emotions. So this, of course, requires a consideration of the context and whether or not this is appropriate for the occasion. But if it is, then I can use things like humor, or I can tell a moving story to get their attention, to draw them in. But of course, for presentations, you need to make sure that you're considering who you're presenting to, what the context is, and whether or not an appeal to emotions is most appropriate. And then finally, you want to establish your credentials. So why should your audience listen to you? Maybe you have personal experience, maybe you've read up on this topic before, you've done your research, and establishing why they should listen to you will help them to give you their full attention and pay attention to your presentation. So that's also important to do as well. All right, so after invention, you'll begin the organization process of thinking about how you're going to present what you've chosen to present and what order you're going to put it in. So the key to a good presentation just in general, regardless of the purpose, is to think of it kind of like a story. So if you're presenting, for instance, about the research you've done, you're presenting, the presentation then is the story that you want to tell about this interesting thing that you figured out. So the three main parts of your presentation, it's pretty straightforward. You have your introduction, the body of your presentation, which is your main points that supports your argument, and then your conclusion. And this will, of course, look different depending on how you choose to arrange it, but more or less, this is how your presentation should be set up to make sure that you're conveying your argument clearly and following a logical progression. So the purpose of your intro is to get the audience's attention, share your thesis, the point for your presentation, and preview the organizational structure for the rest of your presentation. I did all of these things with this presentation. I told you guys a brief story, whether or not it was the most interesting, up to you guys, but I tried. I stated the purpose for why I'm presenting this presentation today, and then I gave y'all those 5 points that I'm going to be covering for the presentation. And although you do want to get your audience's attention, make sure that whatever you do to accomplish that is relevant to your presentation. So just telling a random joke or something might get their attention on you, but then it will be harder to shift into your presentation from that. So make sure that whatever you do, if you're sharing like a startling statistic, if you're telling a story, if you're telling a joke even, that it has something to do with your presentation, so it keeps it on the focus on your topic thematically. All right, so then the body of your presentation is where you build your argument. You're presenting your main points and you're providing your supporting material. So when you do this, make sure that you're using phrases like according to so-and-so, or in the study by so-and-so, to give a verbal attribution to your research. And this not only conveys, avoids plagiarism with conveying where you got your information, but it also provides a support and credibility to your argument by showing, hey, I've done my research. These other people who, have done studies, have published papers, also agree with what I'm saying. So it's building that credibility more and more as you present your points and provide your supporting material. And then for your conclusion, you're restating your thesis, reviewing your main points, and really making that final statement that your audience will take away from your presentation. So this is your chance to clarify the main point that you want your audience to leave with after your presentation. And then between all of these different sections are transitions that you use to connect the different parts of the presentation together, help the audience understand how the different parts fit together into your argument. So they help the audience follow the structure. So for instance, the preview, when you set up what you're going to be talking about, gives you the chance to then refer back to that preview as you're going through and say, okay, this is my next point. This is my next point. So your audience knows where you are in your argument. Transitions between those sections are important. And then also the review at the end, of course, is essential to to giving you one final chance to say, okay, this is what I want you to take away from my presentation today. Okay, so moving on now to the third point of my presentation with talking about visual aids. We'll start with slides and with the presentation slides themselves and how to design those. Just some tips for what to go for and what to avoid when designing your slides. And then we'll also talk about how to include and what to include for things like statistics and visuals and images. So first of all, we'll focus mainly on text. And with font style, for font size and style, you want to make sure that you're choosing a font that's readable and simple. Don't go crazy with the fonts. There's so many to choose from of course, in PowerPoint and in Office in general. It's easy to kind of get distracted with some of the fancier fonts. Just go with something simple, go with something straightforward. Don't go with any like more memey fonts either, like Comic Sans or Papyrus. Those will just end up being distracting. Go with something that's just clear and easy to read. For the color of your text, the main thing is to make sure that there's enough contrast between the foreground and the background, between the text and whatever's behind it. So you want to go usually with reds or blacks, those darker colors, because greens and blues can be hard to see sometimes. And also yellows and oranges can be hard to see, and any colors that look neon. You want your font color to have that good contrast. And when you're thinking about this too, especially if you're presenting virtually on Zoom, or if there's going to be an audience that's partially using their computers, or if you're presenting something on a screen, different screens are going to look different as far as colors. So some people might have different settings for their colors on their computers. The size of their screen might be too small to see the contrast. For instance, like with my computer, I read an article once about how blue light can impact your sleep. So I turned the blue light way down on my computer monitor, so blues don't show up as well. If there's not enough contrast, I won't really be able to see the difference. Like if it's a blue on blue text, it's going to be hard to see. And also consider too that you might be presenting to people who are colorblind and may not be able to see that contrast either. And you don't want that sort of thing to be inhibiting the clarity of your slides. So just be safe about it and make sure you have enough contrast between the foreground text and the background color. For the content, remember that the slides are not the presentation. They are supplementing the presentation. They're a really great tool. Obviously, I love them. I use so many of them, but they're just meant to convey the key concepts and information. They shouldn't have everything that you're saying on the slide. Often if you're presenting statistical information or graphs, this is a really great way to show it visually quickly, but everything doesn't need to be on there. And your presentations, if I remember correctly, will only be about 15 minutes long. So you really don't want to have super text heavy slides that audiences will take forever to read. You want to be doing most of the presentation verbally and just having the slide there to back up what you're saying. And like with this slide, I have my main points on here. I've got the main topics, but if I put everything I was saying on here, goodness gracious, it looked like one of those tiny little, like those t-shirts where their whole script to a film is printed on and it's really, really tiny. That's what the slide would end up looking like. So instead, I don't need that. I just need the main points to refer to as I'm presenting. For the themes, make sure the theme matches the content of the presentation. Don't have anything distracting there. Simple themes are best. And don't have anything that's too different from what you're presenting. Your theme should back up your presentation. For your layout, avoid too much white space, but also, of course, don't cram your slide with so much information that it looks like a wall of text. So find a good balance between the text and the white space. And also remember that when presenting to audiences in English, they read from left to right and from top to bottom. So you can think about that when you're guiding your reader's eyes, your viewer's eyes throughout your slide. And then effects. Don't go overboard with effects. I'm sure we've all had experiences of, death by PowerPoint with everything zooming around, those crazy prezzies where it's like a roller coaster ride, makes you feel sick by the end of it, zooming out, zooming in, flashes of color. Too many effects can make it difficult for you to present the material and difficult for the audience to focus on what you're saying. So if you have effects, they should enhance your argument and not interfere with it. And there's also the issue too with relying so much on effects, and then if something goes wrong, if they don't play, if you can't get them to work properly, if they go out of order, that can really throw off your presentation. And when you're dealing with 15 minutes to present, you don't want anything like that to interfere. And then of course, include citations on your slides or on a final slide if you cite any material that you didn't create yourself. So if you're using any pictures or visuals that you didn't make sure that the citation is somewhere in that presentation. If it's important to your argument, like we talked about earlier, you can do verbal attributions and say who you're citing in your presentation itself. But if it's more just, if it's just there to back up your point or to provide a visual, then just make sure that the citation is there either on the slide or at the end. Now here's just a couple of slides that just show different versions of layouts to kind of illustrate a point too. This is a symmetrical layout. You just have the text on top, the pictures of the cats on the bottom, and it's just very, very balanced versus the asymmetrical layout, which staggers them a bit and gives more of a dynamic view to the slide. Neither of these are, the one kind of slide to recommend, the one kind of layout to recommend, because in one case, the symmetrical, it's balanced, it's static, it's a little bit boring, but it gets the information across clearly. With the asymmetrical, it's a lot more dynamic. Your eyes move around the screen more, but that might be to your detriment if it's hard for the audience to focus on one thing on the screen and their eyes are moving around and focusing on the different cats and the different text instead of on what you're saying. So just think about making intentional choices with your slides, making choices that also relate to how much you want your audience to be focusing on what you're saying versus studying the slide that you're presenting. So effective slides in general, they should be memorable. So they should have an impact on your presentation. They should be professional. So don't spend all your time doing your slides, practice more your presentation, but do spend enough time to make them look professional and clean. They should be clear. So make sure that there's nothing ambiguous there. Everything that you're saying is easy to see and also easy to read. They should be able to look at the slide, get the point from it very quickly, instead of spending all their time reading over what you have on the slide instead of listening to what you have to say. And what slides should not do, despite their advantages, I mean, we all love slides, but they do have their drawbacks too, and they should not divert attention from the speaker. If they're filled with too much sound, animation, imagery, the audience is not going to be paying attention to you. You're the presentation, the slides are not your presentation. They also shouldn't tempt you to read from them. And a good presenter knows the material enough to present on it and not lean on the slides and rely on the slides to convey that information. You should be able to give your entire presentation without your slides. So if something goes wrong, suddenly, oh, we don't have a projector for you after all, or if Zoom is just being Zoom and not letting you share your screen, you should still be able to present without them. You should know your material well enough to do that. Slides are just there as supplementary material. They also shouldn't limit your ability to adapt to unforeseen circumstances. So like the issue of a computer issue, or if an audience member asks a question, or if something interrupts your speech, you should be able to, move away from your slides, talk with that, engage with that issue, resolve that issue, and then go back and not feel like you're totally thrown off course because your slides, you had to go out of order or that you got distracted. You should be able to adapt to whatever comes up during your presentation. And then finally, they shouldn't take too much time to prepare because you want to be practicing your presentation, your delivery, what you have to say. You don't want to be spending all your time making super fancy award-winning slides and then have your presentation suffer because of that. So going back to talking about the text on the slides, when you're choosing a font, of course, like we talked about, you want to use font styles that are easy to read. And in general, serif fonts are considered easier to read for body text. So I'm using serif for across the board for this presentation. Serif fonts are fonts where each of the letters has a little bit of an embellishment on it. Like you can see with that U in the U's, there's two little lines at the top of it, just those little embellishments at the ends and sides of the letters. Those are typically used for body text. while sans serif, those without those embellishments, are typically used for headings. In this presentation, I'm using serif for both the heading and the body text, but in general, that's a good way to differentiate your text if you want to do that. When in doubt, though, Times New Roman tends to be the standard. I know there's other fonts like Georgia that are typically standard as well. And those standard fonts are, first of all, they're just easy to see, and they're also easy to transfer between one computer or one printer and another because they're generally standard. You won't have any issue with something not recognizing your font if you choose something that's just standard. Use at least 24 font size, larger for headings or titles to make sure everyone can see your text, and also acknowledging not only with those who are seeing on the screen, but also those who are seeing on their own personal screens. Someone may be using their phone, maybe using a tablet, may be harder to see unless the text is big enough. And then also be careful with font animations. They can be a good way to get and hold attention, but don't let them be distracting. So here's a slide that gives an example on animation. So we have our first side. There we go. It almost didn't work for me there too. Almost just illustrated my point for me. So on the first half, the text is distracting. It's silly. It's a lot of text too. It bounces in, it flashes, and it's distracting. The second half, though, might actually be more beneficial if you have each of those points coming up as you're discussing them. I tend to just like to have everything on the slide at once, but that can be useful if you're having, okay, we're talking about how too many words are hard to read. Now we're talking about how they're confusing, just having one coming up at a time. But just sticking to those simple and professional animations, like just the appear and fade, is probably the best way to go to avoid anything that's too distracting, too complex for just a simple text animation. And then with creating effective text in general, make sure that you remember that slides are like billboards. People typically just glance at them and then glance away. They should be paying attention to you, not your slides, or not at least their full attention on your slides. So use only the bare minimum amount of text necessary so your reader actually reads and remembers what's on the slide. If you're using complete sentences, make sure you punctuate those sentences appropriately. When you're using bullet points, if those are bullet points with complete sentences, they should be punctuated. If they're not complete, punctuation isn't necessary with them. And then doing things like keeping list items parallel, because lists are an easy way to convey information, a lot of information quickly and concisely. But if they're confusing, if you have non-parallel lists, like I like swimming, to go, run, and bike, instead of the same, the verbs conjugated in the same manner, swimming, running, and biking, that can be confusing, draw your audience's attention away. So just paying attention to these little things, paying attention to making sure that it's as clear and concise as possible, not too much text. Everything has been revised and reviewed, so it conveys that information quickly, concisely, and you don't have to spend a lot of time reading it. And if you're wanting to emphasize the text on your slides, there's several ways to do that. I'll talk about 4 ways to do this. For instance, you can do filtering, where you can enclose your text with borders. This also works for emphasizing images as well. Queuing is where you're ordering the text based on level of importance. So you can have different sizes of headings for different sections of your slides. You can use color variation, where you have different colors for headings or subheadings. Like with this presentation, the headings for the most part are in maroon, while the body text for the most part is in black. So it differentiates between those different types of information. And then highlighting, you can do things like bold, underline, italicize to draw attention to particular parts of sentences or particular words. But of course, use these in moderation, only when you need to draw attention to particular parts of text, particular parts of your slides, so you don't, again, distract or draw attention away from what you're saying. Okay, so that's the text part of the visuals. We'll move on to the more visual part of the visuals, the actual images, graphs. But just so far, are there any questions about what we've been talking about so far? Any comments you want to make? Anything that you've experienced in the past with presenting text, or if you have any cases where you've watched a presentation and they've had just way too much text on their screen, something like that. Okay, we'll just plunge on then. And if you do have any questions, again, feel free to ask, feel free to stop. If you disagree with anything, feel free to stop me. That is a-okay. Feel free to just write in the chat or speak up. So also, of course, like we said, like I said before, the slides themselves are visual aids, but here we're talking about visual aids beyond the text on the slides. So these might be especially useful for your project reports, for your projects, because you'll want to be presenting the information in a way that's easy to get across quickly on the screen. So you might want to be using visuals. They should be relevant and appropriate to your audience, of course. You don't just want to add a visual for the sake of adding a visual. Use them strategically to manage white space, to add variation and interest, or to explain a concept that you're discussing. And this is where purpose and audience awareness is especially important. So if you're giving a scientific presentation, a more STEM-based presentation, that might require a more graphical data representation. While if you're giving a general speech to a general audience about like a famous figure, for instance, you might want to rely more on public photos than on graphs and statistics. So we'll talk about three main kinds of visuals to consider, and that's images. It's just pictures, photographs, things to enhance your presentation, like if you're going for a particular theme. Graphs, charts, and tables kind of speaks for itself for that, for presenting data quickly in a very a visual way that gets that information across immediately. And then watermarks, which are parts of the slides that go in the background of the foreground text and information, kind of add a bit of depth to your presentation, might also add a bit more thematic support for what you're presenting about. So first of all, with images, just a general suggestion about photos, make sure they fit naturally into the layout of your slide. So if you notice how the bat on the left looks less professional than the bat on the right because the corners are showing, putting the bat into the corner can help make that, just that simple move can help make the photo look better. So think about where you're placing the photos on your screen. You can also add borders to your photos, which also make them look a bit more professional than just hanging out there in the middle of the slide. Here's a slide on the graphs, statistics, if you're presenting this data visually. And here's two ways that you can show the same sort of information, but you get something different across with each style. So if you're looking at the chart on the left, you get the numerical information. It's a lot more specific, a lot more precise. But it might take a little bit longer to understand what point is being made here, instead of looking at the pie chart, which doesn't give the precise data, but it does give a comparative information, get that comparative information across very, very quickly. So when you're considering what you want to show on your slide, neither of these are preferable over the other, but think about what you want to convey, what you're asking your audience to do and process, and what you want them to understand. So think about what is most important. Is it most important to you to get the specific numbers across, or is it more important to you to make the point of, look how many more cards are sold during Christmas time than through any other holiday? What's most important to get your point across, and be considering that in how you present your data. And then these background images, these watermarks, like what's in this slide is a watermark back there behind the text. They're usually used with logos, but PowerPoint also lets you put a photo in the background to use as a watermark, as that background image. Just make sure that it's faded enough so that the text still stands out. It should be subtle, unobtrusive, and provide enough contrast so you can still read the text without it blending into that background. Can be useful. I like how it provides some sense of depth there, gives the eye a little bit more to look at on the screen, but don't choose anything that's just too dramatic to go in the background of your slides, that it draws the attention away from the text. And just a point about using audio or video. I don't think I shared my audio, so you won't have to deal with, maybe you'll have to hear the cats in a second, but there's like a meow sound on this slide. But also there's this adorable video of these kittens. And if you're using video or audio, it's also going to draw attention away from what you're saying. And once you start playing that video of the kittens, the chances are that people are not paying attention. Your audience is not paying as much attention to what you're saying. They're watching the adorable kittens. So pay attention to this. Is this something that you're okay with? Is this video important enough to what you're saying to put it on the screen to have the attention drawn away from you? Or is it just going to distract from what you have to say and ultimately be just a distraction from your presentation? Let's see if this ends up. Don't know if you ended up hearing that. Okay, so moving on to critiquing the following slides. This is where I need y'all's participation. I have 5 slides to show y'all, and they're going to be showing some of the things that we talked about. Some of them are, they seem pretty good. Some of them probably need a bit more revision. But think about what we talked about. Think about critiquing them. What's good about them? What's bad about them? And tell me what you think. Tell me your thoughts. If you're on Zoom, put it in the chat up here. I'm not sure how well I can hear you guys in the classroom, but participate how you can. I'll be paying attention and see what y'all think about these following slides. So here's the first one. And we have the text still appearing. And there we are, the full slide. What are y'all's thoughts on this slide? What's done? Is there anything that they do well with this slide? Is there anything that could be done better? Could have used bullets. Yeah, that's a great point. I think bullet points would have made this a lot easier to read if they were able to shorten it down and just use those quick bullet points instead. You're saying too wordy and yellow is a hard color to read. Yeah, exactly. Personally, I hate the color yellow for text. It's just really jarring, especially when it's on that white background. Maybe if it was on a dark background, that might be easier to see. But for this, it's just so jarring. Yeah, shouldn't use yellow text. Lack in contrast on font and background. Yeah, exactly. And then the effects. Yeah, they're slow and irritating. Yes, precisely. Slow, irritating text. It takes forever for them to appear on the screen. Yeah, this slide could use some work. Is there anything that it does well? The numbers? Yeah, because that way it's not written out, so it does save a little bit of economy on the text with the numbers. Still quite a bit of text. The bullet point suggestion I think is a really good one. Yeah, attention grabbing info, it definitely is engaging. You like the information gives detailed numbers. Yeah, the detail's nice. That's true.
Anybody
It also
has any comments, let me know and I'll relay them. I've got a microphone.
Oh, perfect. There also is the difference between the kind of the font for the text itself in the body of the slide and the title. That text is different, so that's good. That stands out. Notice too that there's no punctuation, even though these are complete sentences, I believe, for the most part. Yeah, these are complete sentences. So there should be punctuation with those. But overall, and it sounds like y'all have it for what you would do to revise this. I think the best thing probably to do is change the color, right? Is from what I'm seeing, change the color and then also use bullet points to reduce that amount of text. I guess one thing that could be good about the way it appears, the animation was super annoying, but if you did have it appear one at a time, that would give you a chance to kind of split up the text if you really felt like, yeah, the transitions can set pace. They're a little irritating. Exactly. Yeah. Perfect. That's what I was saying here too. Yeah, we agree that the transitions probably you could have chosen something a bit less irritating, not like the weird curtain appearing text. But it could set the pace if you're wanting to talk about each thing individually, and if you can't find a way to make the text more concise. All right, let's go to our next one. So what are y'all's thoughts on this one? There's no animation on this one, thank goodness. What are y'all's thoughts on this slide?
Any comments out here? The title is too long.
Title's too long. Yeah, it's a lot of text.
And small text, yeah.
We've got the pie chart looks wonky. It does.
The 3D pie chart's a little distracting. Yeah.
Mhm.
The colors, what about the colors? The colors are ambiguous.
It is kind of hard to, yeah, I see. I think I see what you mean. It's kind of hard to match the colors with the key on the side. They're also not, they're not super distinct, especially between some of those blues and purples.
Yeah, why is the first one in bold? Maybe
Oh
because
yeah,
it's the largest one here.
kind of a difference in the text there. It's unclear. Yeah, unclear why motor vehicle injuries is in bold.
Yeah, lack of consistency.
Right,
Hey,
right.
that's really good. This is the kind of stuff that we're going to be talking about when we critique your presentations.
Nice. Yeah. Well, it sounds like y'all are identifying all the areas that could definitely use some revision with this presentation. That pie chart does look wonky. That is really difficult to look at, difficult to get the information from. At the very least, it takes a while to look at that and figure out what it's trying to convey. So it's probably just the best bet if you're going to use a pie chart to just make it 2D, make it simple. Don't be dramatic with this, with the shadows and 3D art and everything. Yeah, and then yeah, the title small and difficult to read. Yep, that's pretty much everything that I have too for this slide. It might be easier to see if you can shorten that title, or at the very least make it bigger so you could see it. One thing that could be said for the bolded motor vehicle injuries is that maybe drawing attention to that statistic, which might be the most important thing here. But it sounds like everybody kind of had a automatic response to it being inconsistent. So that might be more of a distraction than it actually benefits what you're trying to say. Nice. Okay, so let's move on to this next slide. What are y'all's thoughts on this one?
Anybody? They put the links in the slide. In other words, the source of the slide, they actually copied over the link instead of telling us in ASAB format what the citation is. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, it seems kind of lazy just to drop the link. Plus, if it's, again, in the chat we're getting the same thing too. Don't need the link. If it's on the slide and you're presenting in person, it's kind of useless to have the link anyways. You can't really click on it. At least it's there. It's something, but you know.
Different size images is a little bit rough. It just makes it look kind of rough.
Yeah. One thing you might could do to address that, at least what I would do if this slide was given to me, the first thing I would do is add borders to that. So that might help address that issue, is making it feel a bit more intentional with borders, but it might still be distracting. I see what you're saying too about not just the different sizes, but the different shapes of the images might be a little bit distracting.
A random list of fruits doesn't seem to be any purpose. What are you trying to tell me here?
Yeah, so it's hard just from looking at the screen from seeing that. That could be something that you could do verbally if you're just having it there, especially if this is like in the middle of your presentation and you're making your point clear. But it's probably a good idea to have some sort of at least beginning to that sentence that says why you're listing these fruits.
Yeah, I think what you're trying to say is this slide doesn't really stand alone.
Yes, right.
Just by looking at it, I don't know what point they're trying to make, except this is obviously a training aid. The presentation is talking about Pacific Island garden crops, and here are some examples. So the word examples would help this slide to stand alone a little bit.
Yeah, even just examples of Pacific Island garden crops might help. Yeah, so this would be terrible as a poster if you were doing this as a poster presentation, because it absolutely could not stand alone. We have good graphic to explain what each term is referring to. Yeah, the graphics are nice. You got to admit. So is there anything that this slide is doing well that y'all like about it?
Somebody name something positive about this slide that you like.
The colors, yeah, the colors are good. The green is very appealing.
So the different size pictures for some people is not a big deal. I suppose if you're kind of OCD and you need some symmetry in your life, this is going to bother you. But if you're not that guy, then I'm okay with this.
Maybe if it's some variation too, like you said, with thinking about it as part of a bigger whole, if there's a bunch of slides that are symmetrical, this might offer some some variation to that. Folks in the chat are saying the colors are good. The font and colors look nice. Yeah. I feel like those greens really stand out. Yeah, nice. So one thing that the slide does too is it is a good example of asymmetrical balanced asymmetrical design. And it is, for those of us who have that OCD, you know, I look at this and I'm just like, oh, I want to fix this. But it can provide a bit of movement through the slide. It moves your eyes from the left to the right. So think about it in that context, and that it can offer that bit of variability. Okay, next one. There's two more. This one, what do y'all think about this slide?
Too much text. What else?
Too much, yeah, way too much text. Getting that in the chat too.
The title is smaller than the body.
You gave up reading it in 2 seconds. Yes, the title's smaller than the text. That looks a bit weird.
It's 2 sentences in there instead of bullets.
Yeah.
Hard to read.
There we go. Bullets. I like that point. I think bullet points, that's always my go-to. Bullet points make things a lot easier to consume if you can just break this up into bullets. Yeah. I love the comment, I gave up reading it in 2 seconds. You look at this and it's just like, nope, not today. I'm not reading this. What's the point of having this on the slide? So yeah, sounds like the main concerns, aside from, yeah, the title being smaller than the text, that's a bit painful too, is that this is too much text in the slide. It's a wall of text. If anyone does take the time to read this, it's going to be a lot of time and it's going to distract from what you're saying. Okay, last slide.
Go back to that one. Now, here's the challenge for this class. Your presentations are probably going to come after you've written the paper on this topic. So the temptation is going to be to go through your paper and cut and paste text, all right? But you can't, we don't want you to do that because you'll end up with this, which is not good. So the challenge is, you've got to work at it, is how do I synthesize that text into bullets? And this is where I'm going to point you toward your headings and your subheadings. As you organize your paper into headings and subheadings, those subheadings are going to be excellent starting points for bullets. Okay, thanks.
Yeah, and doing that too, and breaking this information up into bullets demonstrates that you really know what you're talking about. You know a lot more about the material than just dropping the material in there. If you're able to actually break it up into manageable segments and put it into your own words, that demonstrates a lot more knowledge and understanding than just dropping it in. All right, last slide to critique, and then we'll move on to talking about delivery.
I'm giving this slide a thumbs up. I like it.
Yeah, not getting before, you know, it was immediate with the response of critiques, but yeah. So why don't we think about, at this slide, you know, we're not getting the critiques. It looks good. So what's good about it? What's good about this slide?
Bold title, uniform text.
Nice, nice. Text is not distracting. It's very easy to read.
Good bullet points. Yeah.
Bullet points. Yeah. Nice graphic. Bullets easy to read in the chat.
Good balance between an image and the text.
Yeah. It sounds like we're liking, it sounds like we're mostly a unit here of liking that balance, of liking that symmetry.
Of course, we're all not liking the citation. The citation needs to be, yeah, not website.
Right. Of course, that's also why, like, having a big bulky citation there could be distracting. So it's something that could go just in the final slide with citing that image too. Yeah. So overall, seems like this one's pretty solid. Aside from the graphic citation, seems pretty nice, easy to read, has those good bullet points. It's using numbers again too for the precise data. Yeah. So this is how I, as you've seen, how I tend to arrange all my slides with that nice balanced setup here. So this might be something that's good to aim for your presentation slide organization. So moving on to giving the presentation, before we do, any questions, any comments about slides, slide design, any concerns? All right. Cool. Well, thanks for y'all's input with evaluating those slides. We'll move on now to the actual process of giving the presentation. the delivery, and the practice. So my final 2 points of the presentation are in this section. So let's talk about communicating with your voice. Your voice is an instrument that you can use to convey your ideas in your presentation. So you think of it as a tool and think about how best you can use it to get your information across. So first of all, you need enough breath support to do all these things. You have to have your breath support for volume, timing, pacing, and emphasis. So I keep water over here so I can take a breath, take a sip of water when I ask a question or something like that. Helps me to just make sure that I stay with enough oxygen to communicate. And I feel like this is often an issue when you either are nervous or you feel like you don't have a lot of time to convey your information. You tend to rush through and get a bit breathless. This has happened to me so many times. So it's a simple reminder, but do remind yourself to breathe, to take time to calm down, to slow down, to get enough breath to convey your information. With volume, you need to make sure and reach the whole audience. So if you're presenting in person in the classroom, you need to make sure your voice carries throughout the entire room, even to the people in the back. This will vary depending on what sort of room you're presenting in, and it might also cause a bit of an issue with having those face shields in front of you as well. And you want to make sure that you're projecting enough to get your voice past those shields and to the full room that you're presenting to. But this also is important for presenting over Zoom as well. Make sure that you're sitting close enough to your microphone, close enough to your computer, so your voice is picked up. I find that I have to speak a little bit louder to make sure I'm heard over my microphone. So make sure you know about these things before you present. For pitch, find a comfortable pitch so that you can project to the audience and still use rises and falls in your voice. Don't try to like change your voice or anything for if it's uncomfortable. That may be hard to maintain for a longer presentation. For voice inflection, you might go up and down in tone to emphasize a concept, a question, or an important statement. And if you think about, most of us probably know someone who talks in monotone, and it's very difficult to focus when they're not modulating their voice and they're not changing their inflection at all. Think about that and think about how you can address that with making your voice more interesting and drawing our attention vocally to what you want us to pay attention to in your speech. For the timing, speak at a steady rate. If you speak too fast, you limit the audience's ability to follow you and your ability to enunciate clearly. If you speak too slow, it might sound boring or condescending. Your rate needs to match what your audience's needs are. So if they need to take notes, if you know they're taking notes, or if you know like they're grading you or something and they need more time, you might need to slow down a little bit. Or same thing if the content is dense or difficult, they might need time to process. Or if you want to leave time for questions, make sure you build time into your pacing for that. And then pauses, this is something that I had to work on because for the speaker, a pause, even a short pause, feels unending. It feels like it's ridiculously long and you're just sitting there in silence. It always feels longer for the speaker than for the listeners. But this can help your audience to process what you're saying, help you to gather your thoughts, and pauses are generally preferable to filler words. All right, so we're also going to talk about communicating with your body. And this is also to draw attention to you because remember that the PowerPoint is not the presentation, you are your presentation. So the audience should be paying attention to you. So we'll talk about ways to effectively communicate using gestures and stance and eye contact during your presentation. And some of these apply to in-person presentations, some of these apply to Zoom. We'll kind of differentiate between that. But these are good practices to maintain and to be aware of during your presentation. So as far as gestures, they should be natural. You want to make sure your hands are free to gesture, and don't be doing anything that's like a nervous habit because that can be distracting both to you and to your audience. So if you clap your hands all the time, or if you're fiddling with a ring, or you're clasping and unclasping your hands, that might be distracting to your audience. Also, if you're worried about audio too, it might make some weird audio sounds if you're doing something like that. So be aware of that. one way to catch issues like that is to record yourself giving a presentation, because we often don't know when we're doing something like that, because it's so ingrained in what we do. And seeing a recording can be a little bit painful because it's watching yourself, but it can help you catch those things and avoid those things in future presentations. I know there was someone who presented for the Writing Center who said that she didn't realize that when she was presenting, for some reason, she was always doing like claw hands when she was presenting. She didn't know until she saw a recording that she was doing this, and was able to stop doing that in her presentations. For your stance, if you're sitting in Zoom, this is different. You just want to make sure and have good posture. But if you're standing, make sure you have a stable, commanding stance. Feet generally shoulder width apart, flat on the floor. Avoid swaying, bouncing, or slouching. This goes for Zoom too, especially if your chair makes noise. If I move too much in this chair, it squeaks really weird. So I try not to move too much. Just be aware of what you're working with and avoiding those distractions. And then if you're using a podium, put your notes on the podium, but don't grip and lean on the podium. Be careful about making noise with it too, because that can affect the audio, especially if you're having a split situation where you're talking to people who are both present and virtual. That might cause issues with the audio. And be careful with tapping or any noise on the podium. Normally I talk to you about feeling like don't feel like you need to hide behind the podium, feel like you can step out, you can use your space, you can walk around. That might be less advisable in the current situation with the COVID preventions going on right now. But in general, do feel like you can move around to the ability that you're able. Don't feel like you have to stay in one static position for your full presentation. Unless you're presenting on Zoom, you're kind of stuck, unless you want to scoop up your computer and walk around. But, that's not super advisable. It's up to you, though. And then also with eye contact, this normally has to do with presenting in person, and we'll talk about what this looks like for Zoom in a minute. But you want to establish that eye contact early and shift your focus throughout the room to different people to keep them engaged. And also so you're not talking to one person the whole time, the person who's sitting in front, not just communicating to them throughout the entire presentation. And then your clothing too, make sure they match what you choose to wear matches the circumstances, but also that you are comfortable in what you're wearing. There's nothing worse than being nervous about a presentation and also being nervous because your sleeves feel weird. So make sure that you're comfortable in what you're wearing, that it makes you feel confident, but that you still feel like you're professional and you're ready to build credibility with your audience through what you wear. For Zoom, that's a bit different because basically, you choose a shirt to wear and nobody sees anything else that you're wearing. You could be wearing your puppy dog pajama pants and no one would ever know. For me, though, I do like to dress up a little bit. When I'm presenting for Zoom, I still wear jeans and such just because it makes me feel ready to present, makes me feel a little bit more put together. But it's entirely up to you what you choose to wear, and make sure that you are the one you're feeling comfortable with your choice of dress. Okay, so you have a question here. If the team presents fully remotely, how to smoothly transfer speaker to next member since body language is not obvious via small screen? Yeah, so we'll talk a bit more in a second about team dynamics with that, but the best way to deal with that, since you don't really have, you can't, the boxes are all in different places for everyone. You can't really point over to the next person to speak. This is why it's really good to prepare for this ahead of time so that each member knows when it's their turn to speak, which slides are theirs. And another way to communicate that too is just remember that verbal communication is probably the best way to go when you're communicating virtually. So just say the person's name. Like if I'm looking up here, I'll be like, so Jacob has this statistic. He can tell you about this. And that would cue him to then talk about his part of the presentation. But the best thing to do about that, my best answer for that is to make sure these expectations are communicated beforehand. Everyone knows what part of the presentation is theirs and how much time they have to present. And we'll talk more about that in a second, but does that answer your question for now? Okay, awesome. Yeah, we'll have more details about that in just a sec. So here's specific Zoom presentation tips before we get to those team dynamics tips. First of all, you want to make sure and look your best. We talked a bit about that a second ago with dressing comfortably, but also appropriately. But consider also what can be seen in your camera's field of view. I don't mind if y'all see what's behind me. I think my stuff back there is pretty cool. It's started a lot of interesting conversations too. I'm aware of what's back there and I'm fine with that. But be aware of what's behind you and make sure that you're okay with your audience seeing that. And if not, see if you can find a new location where your background is something that you don't mind them seeing, or use a Zoom background. I see some of y'all in the group are using Zoom backgrounds. Zachary, I love that you're in space right now. And those can look really, they can also make it look really professional and avoid you having to find a new space if that's just not something that you can do. I've also found that these backgrounds, they're really easy to get to work. Even if there's not as much contrast between yourself and the background, you don't really need to have like a green screen or a different color thing back there. It's usually able to pick up your face versus what's in the background pretty easily. So it's kind of something good to play around with if you have a chance to see what you can put back there. I know for our meetings for the Writing Center, a lot of us look like we're in libraries, fancy libraries, or in England or somewhere on an island beach. You can put something back there that is professional that you want them to see, but it's a great way if you can't manage your space to that extent to still manage what's seen behind you. Sounding your best. To the best that you can, try and control what impacts your audio. We're in weird times. We don't have a lot of control over everything, but to what you can do, try to move to a space where there's not as much background noise going on, or if there is, see if you can control or mediate that. Like if you have a TV on in the background, see if you can turn that off. I've got my laundry room right over here. I try not to have anything running over there because it can be loud and distracting. If you have pets, I've got my dog in the back room right now because sometimes she'll bark randomly and distract from what I'm talking about with my presentation. But then, of course, there's some things that you can't control. You can't have full control over your roommates. You can't have full control over the person who's using a weed whacker in the front yard. That's outside of your control, and there has to be some sort of understanding for that too. But there is to some extent that you can do to control your audio. Also, if you find that you're doing a lot of presentations and this is just like what you're doing and you feel like it's a good investment, getting a dedicated microphone can be useful. I ended up picking up this one and I love it because this is all I do now pretty much. It's my job. And it makes the audio a lot better and easier to hear. And you can find these for pretty inexpensive now. But if that's not something that you want to commit to, that's totally fine. Work with what you have. Work with what you can afford. Just make sure that you're managing the audio to the best of your ability. Connect with viewers. That's a lot more challenging to do over Zoom because and in the era of COVID, because you can't move around. I used to love to like move closer to the people I was talking to, connect with them, look at them, talk specifically to them. But I can't do that anymore because I only have one place that I can look, and that's my little camera up here. But you can still use that to your benefit and be looking at the camera as you're speaking, and it at least simulates the sense of eye contact with your audience. And one trick that I found too is I move the boxes that y'all are in, your camera boxes. I move y'all immediately beneath the camera. So when I'm looking at you, if you're speaking to me, it looks like I'm looking straight at the camera. I can connect with the camera more. So it's just a little trick for looking more at the camera. And then practice, of course, practice in front of your computer if you're presenting virtually. So you're comfortable with this space, you're comfortable with the whole Zoom presenting situation. And it's also a good idea to record yourself, or even if you have a roommate or family member who's willing to help you practice, to connect with them over Zoom and present for them so you're comfortable with this new sort of environment. Any questions about Zoom presenting or anything that's come up that's been challenging for you, or interesting ways that you've found to combat the scary new situation of presenting virtually? Okay. Any questions, just let me know. We'll go on now to team presentation dynamics, because I know y'all will be presenting in groups too. And so this is what we were kind of talking about earlier. So with presenting on Zoom, presenting virtually especially, it can be really awkward if you don't plan on things and find the answers to these questions ahead of time. Like if you don't know who's going to be advancing the slides, that can be awkward if you're in the middle, like, who's got the slides, who can change them, or the person who has control over the slides isn't paying attention. that can be incredibly awkward and cut into the time that you have to present. So remember, you guys have only 15 minutes, so you don't want to be figuring out the answers to these questions in the middle of your presentation. So for instance, who is the host? Who could advance the slides? Make sure whoever this is knows ahead of time who they are. If you're going to be passing the host, I don't recommend passing the host per se. That can just get complicated and confusing. Just make sure the person who's supposed to be advancing the slides knows they're supposed to be doing that and knows when they're supposed to do so. You can also just cue them as well and say like, oh, whoever's in charge, make sure you switch the slides now, or can you show me the next slide? That's usually pretty easy to work into a presentation, pretty unobtrusive. And then who will be presenting which slides? This is kind of what we talked about earlier too. Make sure each person knows which slides they're responsible for. I found it usually to be easiest if you have, okay, I'm doing these 3 slides, next person's doing these 3 slides, next person's doing these 3. So it's not like a ping pong situation where it's back and forth. That way you have your set of slides that you're assigned to. If you're in smaller groups, you can also alternate slides. Just make sure that that information is understood. Each person knows what they're responsible for, which slides are theirs, and when that transition is going to be. And then timing is really important for Zoom presentations too, or presentations just in general, group presentations in general. If the first person takes more than their amount of time that they have to present on their slides, it's going to eat into the time for the other people, and they won't have as much time as they prepared for to present their slides. They might find themselves getting into trouble with having to rush through presenting the information, not presenting it as clearly as they could, dealing with issues of breath, and anxiety too, with trying to get through information in a shorter amount of time than what they had planned for. So think about how much time, I mean, you can just work it out mathematically. If you have 15 minutes and 3 people are in your group, that's 5 minutes per person. Think about what sort of time each person's working with and be aware of that. And that is where practice really comes in handy here, is when you're practicing for timing for things like that. It's a good idea to time your presentation, make sure you know how long it's taking you, and if it's taking you longer, you might need to cut back on the information, see if you can present it in a more concise manner. And think about what you have for your notes too. Instead of full sentences, instead of scripting yourself, just have an outline, and then have just speaking notes that you can refer to quickly and easily during the presentation. If you have note cards, make sure that they are numbered. So if they get mixed up, things happen, they get dropped, they get confused, you can put them back in order quickly. And if you have typed notes, make sure that the font size is big enough for you to refer to quickly in your presentation. This is also something good to be aware of in Zoom presentations, of keeping your notes beneath the field of view. You can just set them on your keyboard or in front of you, just out of view, so you can refer to them without it being distracting with you holding it up here, where everyone can see. Practice in front of people if possible. But of course, with everything going on, that's kind of hard to do sometimes. So it also helps to videotape your presentation, then watch the video. That's what we were talking about earlier with catching habits or things that you're doing with your hands that you can prevent. And you can also have like we talked about earlier, with getting classmates or friends or roommates to present to practice, connect with them on Zoom. And also, the Writing Center, we have consultants who can give you feedback on your presentations as well. So I really recommend this, to come see us. You can also, we're entirely virtual this semester. So we're still here, everything's online. But if you make an appointment and tell us that you want to practice your presentation, you can give that presentation for us virtually, test everything out, make sure everybody understands all the logistics, all the details of the presentation, and get feedback in a way that's you won't have a grade, we won't be reporting back to your professor, so it's a lot less of an anxiety-inducing situation than when you actually present in front of your class. And if you haven't been to the Writing Center before, I'll talk more about this in a second, but you already pay for us with your student fees, might as well make use of us. If you want to practice beforehand, make an appointment, just tell us what you're doing, that you're doing a presentation, and we can help you with that. More about that in just a second. Finally, even though practice is important, don't over practice. So in other words, don't memorize your presentation. So that not memorizing it gives you the flexibility to respond to different things that come up during your presentation. And if you forget things, remembering just the order that the information goes in will allow you to get back on track a lot faster, to get on track with those bullet points again a lot faster than if you memorized and you forgot a sentence and, oh no, now everything's falling apart because I don't remember what comes next. It's easy to get off track when you memorize, and it's more helpful to just be very, very familiar with your material. Okay, so before I go on to talking about just briefly about what we can do to help you at the Writing Center, any questions about the material that we've talked about today with oral presentations, slide design, presenting on Zoom, delivery in general?
Does anyone have any questions?
Or if anyone has, if you want to share a quick story about a presentation that you've done in the past, I'd always love to hear those. Okay, that is a-okay. So we'll just talk briefly just about what we can do for y'all at the Writing Center. Once again, we are entirely virtual this semester, but you can go to our website, and I'll put the contact information up here. There's our website, writingcenter.tamu.edu. You can also just type in Writing Center TAMU into Google. It's usually one of the first answers, if not the first results that come up. Or you can give us a call, and we can help you with any stage of your project, of your process, at least the writing and presenting side of it. So even if you just got your prompt today, you don't have anything written, you don't have even any ideas, you can still make an appointment to talk to us, and we'll help you brainstorm, we'll help you figure out the best first step to take with developing your project. If you're in the middle and you kind of feel like, oh, I'm not sure if this is going in the right direction, it feels a bit rough, I need some feedback, we're here to help you with that stage as well. And at the end as well, when you're practicing, you're polishing, you're wanting to get one more set of eyes on your work before you present. Any stage, we are here to help. You'll just go onto the website or give us a call and choose what sort of appointment you want. We can do both Zoom appointments, which I think would be excellent for y'all practicing your 15-minute presentations if you do that in advance. And you can make group appointments. There's a box that you can check to say that it's a group. You can log in with multiple people in your group and do the presentation together. Or you can do a asynchronous appointment, which is where you just send in your document, send in your draft, we'll make comments and send it back to you. So those are available for y'all to make online. There's also a bunch of resources on there that are really helpful. We also have some presentation resources there too. Or you can give us a call and we can book you the appointment over the phone. If you just tell us what you're working on, give us your information, we'll put you in the system. Any questions about that? About coming in to see us at the Writing Center?
All right, thank you, Tiffany. We're about running out of time. Does anybody have any questions? It's a very great content. Let's give a pause.
Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you.